And we're at 2 minutes past the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Brian Israel. I am the chair of Friends of Israel's Environment, or FI. Just a quick word about Friends of Israel's Environment. This year, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary, and as part of that celebration, we are launching a speaker series. And Alon Tal, who was our founder over 30 years ago, is our first inaugural guest for this event. So welcome, Alon. We're very, very happy to have you and welcome you here today. Just a quick word about what Friends of Israel's Environment is. We basically have three goals. One is to raise awareness of important environmental issues in Israel through events such as this and a website and newsletters and things like that. Of course, another goal as a 501c3 is to raise much needed funds to support our sponsoring organization, Adam Teva V'Din, which is Israel's premier environmental organization, also founded by Alon Tal. Adam Teva V'Din, loosely translated as people, the environment, and the law. And Amit Bracha, the executive director, will give a little background on Adam Teva V'Din. And then thirdly, we support Adam Teva V'Din in development of legislation and policy and other environmental related issues. For example, FI helped support and develop a climate bill many years ago, and just last year helped Adam Teva V'Din as they were drafting a climate bill, which I think Alon will be speaking to. So that's our mission. And just a couple of logistic announcements. First of all, if you have questions for Alon, just put them in the chat box, send them to the panelists, and we'll get to those questions after Alon's opening remarks. Also, the second of our speaker series is scheduled for November 20th, also a Sunday. It'll be Yossi Abramowitz, a leading environmental activist and entrepreneur in Israel, and he'll be speaking on Sunday, November 20th. Look forward to that. And also, I think Yossi is joining us today. So with that, if you have any questions about FI, please feel free to contact me. And I'm going to turn it over to Amit. Amit Bracha is, in addition to being a great personal friend, since 2010 has been the executive director of Adam Teva V'Din and has led Adam Teva V'Din through many challenging and difficult times, as well as many victories. I think probably Amit has seen more governments than he would like to remember. He's also been instrumental in incorporating environmental justice principles in Adam Teva V'Din's work and many other initiatives. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amit to introduce Alon.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is really a very special event for us. And I first of all want to warmly thank Brian and the Board of Friends of Israel's Environment for hosting this event and putting it together. Your commitment and support to Adam Teva V'Din is really priceless, and we thank you for that. I'll briefly say that, in 1990, MK Alon Tal founded Adam Teva V'Din, which, as Brian said, means in translation, man, people, nature, and the law. Being a man of vision, Alon really aspired to introduce Israel to the American model of non-profit environmental advocacy organizations. He aspired and really succeeded. Thanks to Alon, after 3 decades, today, Adam Teva V'Din really had become the most influential environmental organizations. And how do we do it? Well, with a unique in-house team of committed and experienced attorneys, environmental scientists, sustainable experts, and urban planners, we work to protect the environment of the places where Israelis live, work, study, and play. We go to courts on behalf of the public in order to minimize environmental hazards. We give pro bono legal assistance to underserved and underprivileged communities, and we promote environmental and climate policy on a national level. So early on, Alon managed to create a special and unique qualification for Adam Teva V'Din under environmental laws to represent the public in legal proceedings. This special qualification really helped us and really helps us until today, and it's really been the first wave of environmental litigation in Israel. So side by side for more than 3 decades, our experts draft environmental bills and work hand in hand with Knesset members like Alon Tal in order to enact them. Having said that, we are very proud of the fact that the enactment of the major environmental laws like the Clean Air Law, the Coastal Protection Law, waste management laws, and more were first drafted by our lawyers and experts. And finally, in these challenging times with the world facing a climate crisis, Adam Teva V'Din is once again being called to action. With Brian Israel's leadership, we interact and associate with the Environmental Law Institute of Washington, D.C. and Arnold and Porter law firm in order to learn from the American experience on how to develop a modern and ambitious climate law and policies, of course, for Israel. Being so privileged to have Alon Tal as a Knesset parliament member, we are working hand in hand with him in order to face the climate challenge, knowing that it is the most important human challenge the world has ever faced. So it is really my honor to welcome MK Alon Tal as our keynote speaker, or as we call him here in Israel, Mr. Environment. Alon?
Thank you, Amit, and thank you all for coming out on this Sunday morning or afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're in. It is an honor to be part of the speaking series. I have enjoyed being a former director of Adam Teva V'Din for many years now, and for the last 11 years watched Amit Bracha take the organization and raise it to new levels of effectiveness and professional competence. It is extremely satisfying when you see the organization taking on challenges that you never would have dreamed on, the quality of the attorneys, the scientists, and in general, the contribution they make to Israeli society makes me may feel that it's the most important thing I ever did was to be involved with that organization. But we're here not to talk about the past, we're here to talk about the future. And I was asked to speak about the climate crisis. And so I thought, I'm now a politician for a year now. I'm celebrating my first year in Knesset this week. But as a former academic who spent a good 20, 25 years as adjunct and then as a full professor, I do go through withdrawal now and again without having any PowerPoint experience. So I'm going to give us a brief 15-minute run through if we could, and hopefully it'll be sufficiently provocative to elicit questions. And I'm here as long as you need to answer anything you may want to know, or not, even more than you may want to know about Israel's environmental challenges. Now, if I can get this going, I think we're all set here. Wonderful. So the title, which was suggested for today's session, was Has the Climate Changed on Climate Change? But when I started actually putting the presentation together, I wanted to talk about things that matter, because I think if you're taking time off on a Sunday, obviously these are people who, it's not a beginning seminar, we would call more of a graduate seminar than an undergraduate one where I come from. And so I'd like to talk about, having worked in climate, I think I offered the first class in Israel on climate and law and policy almost 20 years ago. And now we are at money time in terms of saving the planet. And Israel's finally starting to think about what kind of a climate legislation we would like to adopt. And I just thought I'd share with you some general thoughts. They're a little eclectic, but hopefully they'll be able to frame a general conversation that we can talk about what Israel, as part of the family of nations, can and should be doing to do our part to be part of the much, much needed solutions. So just the first thing that I want to start with, of course, is the fact that climate matters a lot in Israel. When we think about the Middle East in general and Israel in specific, it is as a climate hotspot. In other words, since 1970, average Tel Aviv temperatures, where the Adam Teva V'Din offices have gone up 2 degrees, and that's about twice the global average. Okay, that means that what we see around the world starting to happen has already happened a while ago, and the same is true of the sea level rise. We see about twice the world average of 3 millimeter annual increase in the Mediterranean, about twice that much. The new normal in Israel every fall now are floods that in the past were characterized as 100-year floods. Here on the left, you can see at Tel Aviv, right down there at the Rothschild Boulevard, for those who know Tel Aviv, on the right. Nahariya, the coastal city up near the Lebanese border, now has annual floodings, which take their toll. We had a tragic situation a few years ago where a couple was stuck a young couple in southern Tel Aviv in an elevator and literally drowned to death during one of these, what we call extreme weather events. But like I said, they're no longer extreme. It's what we have to starting to get used to in Israel. It used to be that about every 20 or 30 years, we'd have a big forest fire. Now it's coming about every single year. This year was Jerusalem's turn. The year before that, it was Yar Bet Keshes, the Bet Keshes fort near Nazareth. And that's because the rains don't come as frequently and they don't come as early as they used to. And in September, October, November, we have really faced terrible conflagrations, things that now you are seeing in California, but we see it in Israel just the same. Now, the second thing that I'd like to point out is that Glasgow matters. You know, the international community convened once again in Glasgow this past November to talk about how they were doing in terms of implementing the Paris Climate Accord and what else needed to be done. And here you see a picture of our Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, speaking at the Glasgow convention. I was delighted, surprised, when 2 days before his departure to Glasgow, we had a surprise announcement from the Prime Minister that he was making the commitment that we had hoped that Israel would make, that by the year 2050, Israel would be what we call a net zero emitter of greenhouse gases. In other words, although we may not get to no emissions of carbon dioxide or methane or whatever, there will be enough carbon sequestration to make us a non-net contributor. And this is one of many countries that has made this, but in terms of Israel's history, which had typically want to be one of obfuscation and really an attempt to avoid any kind of meaningful commitments, this was very important. Of course, it's very easy to make a 2050 commitment because that makes the future generations or our children locks them in. But what about 2030 commitments? And that's really what we have to be thinking about now. What can we do? Because the scientists tell us that we have about 8 or 9 years really to make the critical changes to avoid the kind of disaster. Now, because this is a talk about Israel, and most of you don't live in Israel, I want to talk about some of the things that Israel experiences unique. So one of Israel's great contributions to agriculture is drip irrigation, but it turns out that drip irrigation matters a whole lot for climate change as well. You know, drip irrigation is this notion that you make small holes, usually in a plastic dripper, and then water and then fertilizers can be released now with subsurface even right in the root zone and have much more efficient. But the truth of the matter is that drip irrigation can be used for crops that we never dreamed of. For example, one of the major sources from agricultural greenhouse gas emissions after, of course, cattle and other animals is rice, okay? And rice paddies are a huge source of methane emissions. But when paddies were irrigated with the drip irrigation technology of the Netafim Corporation from Kibbutz Hatzirim, it was about 1/6 of the actual release of oxides of nitrates and other greenhouse gases. So that this is an area where we need to start thinking about how we farm, and Israel actually has much to offer that. Trees matter, and here I want to say a shout out to Adam Tevadin, which has been really relentless in the best sense of the word in trying to remind Israelis that we could do much better in providing shade. Israel's getting hotter. People, we want them to be walking outdoors. And as somebody goes running every day, I can tell you when I come up from my run and there's 2 sides of the street and one has shade and the other one doesn't, I can just feel the difference when that sun is radiating you down, especially now today in Israel, we were, crossing close to the 100-degree Fahrenheit or, 36, 37 degree level in centigrade. And so recently in Israel, we managed to pass a bill, which I hope will become law, which would really, the government made a decision also to start much more ambitious and conscientious tree planting. It's very, very important. Now, I would argue also that not only do trees matter in the cities where we're trying to do adaptation, but also they're very important for sequestration. Israel, as you know, a dryland country, most of the lands in the country are defined as drylands, either hyper-arid, arid, or semi-arid. Here you have a photograph of the Yatir Forest, which is located in a semi-arid zone. Now, when I talk about afforestation, that is very different than reforestation. And there has been some, I would even say, dissatisfaction among some of the green legitimate perspectives in Israel that say we shouldn't be planting trees there. But the truth of the matter is, this is an area that was massively desertified, massive soil erosion, and about 2 or 3 meters of soil removed, and with it a lot of organic compound. By putting in this forest in the early 1960s, we've now seen a tremendous amount of carbon taken out of the atmosphere and brought into the soil. And as a organic and carbon depleted soil zone, it's much more able to absorb this. And so the kind of carbon sequestration that we're seeing in the Atir region goes far beyond all the expectations of academics who assume that a desert or an arid region forest could never compete with the sort of temperate forest you have in Europe. And here, as you can see, it's comparable. And this, again, is an Israeli contribution that matters. As time goes on and we start thinking in the long term, hydrogen matters. And I think that if you ever want an interesting eco tour when you're in Israel, I would strongly urge you to go visit Petach Tikva, a company called Gencell. Now it's not such a startup anymore. I think they have about 150 workers, but they are creating Israel's fuel cells. First ones using some very, very innovative work. They work with Russian chemists. Not only is Russian Jewish chemists that came and immigrated, but they actually bring chemists from Moscow because they think that they're underutilized and have made some real breakthroughs. I believe, you can see here, they have their first charging station. I've been trying to argue with the Director General of the Knesset that we need to bring this to the Knesset where we can use hydrogen. You know, there's a big problem is we want to electrify our fleets, but where does the electricity come from? And I think these kind of hydrogen solutions are ones that which will be extremely important to us as we move forward. When I think about real solutions to climate, I know wonderful people and everybody cares about the climate change, but very few of us are willing to give up on our airplane flights. And it doesn't seem to me that we're going to be flying on batteries. We're going to need to have hydrogen a big part of our solution for the future. Desalination, that's an issue which Israel, of course, has tremendous innovation, but it's a source of concern. Here you see a photograph of the Ashkelon desal plant, the first of 5 major desal facilities, which have changed the nature of water management in Israel. No longer does Israel stand traumatized when the drought year comes because we know that the Mediterranean Sea will provide us all of our drinking water. This is very important in a region where we see massive droughts coming on a regular basis. Places like Jordan have really been pushed to the edge, and having desalination means that Israel will be able to help Jordan with its water. The problem is that desalination is an energy-intensive technology. So by having desalination facilities and finding our solution, we're in fact exacerbating the very origins, the antecedents of the climate problem. So here you can see where Israel's made its initial desal plants. These are all large. You can see the numbers there. These are in 100 million cubic meters, so 127, basically 127 billion liters of water a year. This is a lot of water. Now we're building another one, which will be open soon in the very far north near the Rosh Nikrab things. The trouble, and you can see the growth, is that Israel's going to need to have more and more desalination because our population is growing at 2% a year. And what are we going to do about this? We did a study, my postdoc and I, about how much energy we're going to need to produce the desalinated water. And if we don't have renewables that are different than the technologies today, how much land would it take to create solar energy to support the desalination? And what we found was that basically we would need an area about half the size of Tel Aviv just for the desalination facilities. So we need to start thinking more creatively about our water energy nexus. And one of the ways, and this brings me to the next thing, is that peace matters. And here you see a map, of course, of the region. On the right, Jordan. There's the Palestinian Authority, Israel. And recently we had some very good news because one of our NGOs that was actually founded in the offices of Adam Tov V'Din. I don't know if I've ever been told, Amit, the whole story about I had a young volunteer and then he got a scholarship and his name was Gidon Bromberg and he was supposed to be a lawyer for us. And I gave him a few hours a week to work on this idea for an international regional organization. And he never did a stitch of work as a lawyer, but he did a great job creating this new organization, EcoPeace. And they have been talking a long time about how Israel should take advantage of the present situation where we don't have a lot of land. As you can see, Jordan is more than 3 times the size of Israel, but their land is largely desert lands, which aren't being very utilized. Perhaps we could create renewable solar energy there, deliver water from the Mediterranean to the parched people of Jordan and create a sort of a win-win situation. And we have the infrastructure in place. Here you can see the pipe which leaves the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, up in the Galilee, and carries water to Jordan, and creating this opportunity under the Jordanian peace treaty. We give them about 50 million cubic meters, but we could give them a lot more now that we know how to desalinize water. And here you see a photograph from discussions. The woman with the mask on is our Minister of Energy, Karine El-Ahrar. We have our critique with some of her policies, but here she was spot on and was pitch perfect as Israel for the first time endorsed this project, this idea that we would start importing about, we'd be given about 200 million cubic meters of water, which would be a huge game changer for quality of life in Jordan in return for copious quantities of renewable energy. So these are things which we can do if we start recognizing that there's a connection between water and energy and land, because we really want to have renewable energy. So when we start talking about the kinds of technologies we need, we know that we really don't want to turn Israel into one big solar panel. And this is another challenge which we have to think about as environmentalists, which is why agrivoltaic electricity matters for a country like Israel, which has a shortage of land, which wants to continue producing food. We have a lot of people argue we're on the edge of a food security crisis. We see what's happening in the world with food prices. Israel imports about 80% of its calories. We're very good farmers, but there's just not enough lands. But if we could integrate solar panels into certain kinds of crops, we might actually get more crops and, of course, get this additional benefit. So this is a new area of research which Israel is working on. And what we're trying to do in the Knesset is remove some of the annoying bureaucratic obstacles which make it difficult to move these technologies forward fast enough. Now, ninth thing I want to say about climate change is that demography matters. This is an issue which I've been talking about for many years. When I first started talking about it, many people in the room became very uncomfortable. But I think as years go on, it's almost become a consensus in Israel that when you are growing at 2% a year, it is very hard to improve your environmental performance. In the world in general, as we run towards a planet of 10 billion people, it's going to be extremely hard to cut back on our greenhouse gas emissions, because every child is born with a God-given birthright to have a carbon footprint. And when a team from University of Vancouver, University of British Columbia in Vancouver did a study, it's actually headed by Seth Wine, a master's student at the time. He asked a simple question. He said, what can I do to reduce my carbon footprint? You can do a lot of things. We should always remember, you can give up on your clothes dryer and hang your clothes. You can recycle. You can drive an electric car, drive no car at all, just drive a bicycle. You can avoid transatlantic flights, give up meat, but 50 times more than any single change in your lifestyle, according to the research, have one less child. So we have to remember that. And part of the reason why Israel did so badly in our performance under the Paris Agreement was we had agreed to cut our carbon emissions per capita. And indeed, Israel did reduce its carbon emissions per capita a little bit, but when you're growing at 2% a year, you are like running on a treadmill. And so we really need to start thinking about the notion that one of the key elements of sustainability has got to be stability. Stability and sustainability go hand in hand. And here is the numbers about how, while the rest of the world was cutting down on their emissions, Israel was going up. Next few slides, as I wrap up my brief presentation, is that Biden matters, okay? I think I'm a politician, so I can say things that NGO leaders like Amit might not want to say, but this was a very dark time when the leader of the United States pulled out of the Paris Accords and left the world with a sense there was no leadership. And I think that we all recognize that Joe Biden has made a real difference. And Israel looks, and we hopefully he'll come visit us in July, and Israel looks to the United States for leadership. The fact that they care about this, that Secretary John Kerry makes a special video and shows it at President Herzog's house, calling on Israel to do better. This resounds with us. Israel is, of course, grateful that the United States is our closest ally, and we look to the United States for leadership. And I believe that the Biden administration is providing that leadership. I wish that there was a certain senator which would help him with his Build Back Better bill and give him the funds he needs. But these are things which we look to and have changed the debate in Israel. 11th, youth matter. I can't think of any environmental issue, and I've been involved for more than 30 years now, which has managed to capture the hearts and minds of young people around the world more than the climate crisis. There's now she's a renegade member of Knesset, but her name is Idit Silman. She made a lot of noise because she's giving our coalition a lot of instability. But she is a religious Israeli who is, pretty normative in her own world. She told me that her 14-year-old son has a picture of a girl in his room, which is not accepted usually amongst Orthodox Israelis. But she said she allowed it because it was Greta Thunberg. In other words, this young woman from Sweden has managed to inspire youth from all the different tribes in Israel and really given a sense that the next generation demands more of us and expects to have something better than the climate anarchy we're going to leave them. So here you see a picture of one of the annual climate marches. This year's last one was the biggest one ever, and I expect 2022 will even exceed that. What's most exciting to me when I go to this recent climate march, and you see 10, 12,000 people, first of all, I feel very old because everyone is young. But it's not just that I see our local branch of the Youth for the Climate. I see soccer teams coming with their uniforms on, saying, we want to be able to play without heat stroke. In other words, more and more young people, particularly high school kids, are understanding the implications of this change, and it's changing their perspective. And I hope that that makes a difference. And for my final and 12th, what matters in climate change, I want to say that Adam Tov V'Din, the Israel Union for Environmental Defense, matters a lot. I think that Amit mentioned at the start of it that they've been busy writing climate laws. The truth of the matter is that our Minister of Environment, I was unsuccessful in getting some of the key expectations and provisions of the Adam Tov V'Din law, but we in the parliament pay much attention to them. And I know that when you want to talk about climate legislation, this NGO is one-stop shopping for me and my staff. We only have 3 people. The Senate, they have between 20 and 60 people working for every senator. I have 3 very, very diligent and conscientious workers, but there's a limit to how much they can do. Thank God we have the civil society. And when it comes to environmental and sustainability issues, the Israel Union for Environmental Defense, the organization which Friends of Israel's Environment is designed to support, have been helpful, not just to me, but I would speak on behalf of one of my close colleagues in the Knesset, Yorai Lav Hartzano. I like Yorai because he's literally young enough to be my son. He's the youngest member of Knesset, age 32. And I don't think he was elected as a big environmental advocate, but they asked him to carry the flag. And as time goes on, he becomes more and more passionate. And he took their law and said, I'm going to try to do this. And we're going to put as much of that law in as possible if we only have the time to do so. So in the end, what we need to do, hope matters. And I believe we can do that. We know the solutions, but I believe that we in Israel need to do a better job. And we can do that by having environmental organizations hold our feet to the fire. And hopefully we in the political sphere will be worthy of the responsibility that we have as stewards of a land that is a holy land for so many people and is on a planet that is getting increasingly warm. It is time to realize that, as Martin Luther King said, there are times when tomorrow is not today. There is such a thing as being too late. We must not be too late. And together, I hope that we can make our country the kind of place you want it to be. So hopefully that's short enough to allow for some conversation and questions. And I'll be happy to send it back to you, Brian.
Great. Wow. Thanks, Alon. Even though it's been a year since you've done a PowerPoint presentation, you've still got it. That was a wonderful presentation and very thought-provoking. I see we have a few questions. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A, and we'll get to everyone's questions hopefully. But I wanted to start, Alon and also Amit, with a question really born from the notion, and I know that there's some mixed feelings about the book Startup Nation, but there is certainly a concept that Israel is an important innovator and exporter of technology, that when Israelis see a problem that might have a technological solution, they're incredibly capable of bringing smart people together and being innovative and creative. And so, you mentioned GenCell, you mentioned the drip irrigation for rice paddies. I've often wondered that, Israel has to be as you said, Israel is committed to be net zero by 2050. But beyond that, if Israel becomes net zero by 2050 and nobody else does, we really haven't solved the problem. So the question is, can Israel help the world become net zero by 2050 in a meaningful way through this notion of really kind of a coming together, bringing the entrepreneurial spirit and the creativity that Israel has shown in cybersecurity and another area in defense to what it was, what is this, the crisis of our times, as you said. And then the question that I would have, so that's the first question, but what I'd like, if you could speak to is, if the answer is yes, how? And what can the government be doing to really encourage, rather than kind of, GenCell's a great example, and I know there are others, but what can and should the government in Israel be doing to really encourage innovation in the climate space?
Meantime, maybe we'll let you give me a break for a minute and we'll hear what you have to say about that.
Okay, thank you, Alon. It was really amazing, and thank you. I would say that for first, Israel needs platform of litigation and regulations, helping all of us, in this innovation stages we want to take, because without this platform, it will be very difficult to really reach net zero by 2050. So it's litigation, it's regulations, it's really putting aside some legal barriers that we have here in Israel in really promoting clean energy, for example, or clean water. So I think the ironic thing is that, as you may know, Israel is really selling a lot of technologies, green technologies, to for example, Mojave Desert and other places in the States, while having a lot of difficulties really implementing them here in Israel, because, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of things that are not being dealt with from the government top down. And I think this is a huge challenge for us together with Alon and the other Knesset members to really take out barriers and really make it worthwhile as a win-win situation to implement green technologies here in Israel. Because at the end, it really, it's a win-win situation. It's not only for the environment, it's also for the economy in Israel, it's also for our health and so on. So really invest in it and don't look at the short, at the short run, but not only look at it as we sometimes look in Israel as a sprint, but as the marathon that we must take.
I would add this. I think one of the reasons why we haven't seen the explosion of innovation in climate tech and clean tech in Israel is because the ecosystem or the way we do business in regular high tech doesn't require a lot of land. You could sit there in your garage in Ra'anana and invent the Waze GPS system. When you want to create a new way of producing solar energy, okay, you need some space. You need to make a pilot. It's something physical. And it breaks my heart that because we have what I think to be a somewhat constipated planning system on this particular matter, many entrepreneurial companies are going and doing their pilot projects abroad, and I think even losing it. I came back from a trip from Denmark. I chair the Israel-Denmark Friendship Parliamentary League. And I was just in Copenhagen for 2.5 days, which is a fascinating place, 67% renewables. I'm happy to wax ecstatic about what they're doing there. But what broke my heart, this new project for a milk factory, which is a non-milk factory. It's a new Israeli innovation. They're building it in Copenhagen because they just said it was too much of a hassle to do in Israel. But to get back to your question, Brian, I would say two things. First of all, food matters. If I had to do a 13th matters. And the fact that 15% of our emissions are associated with the beef industry, and the fact that Israel has several really remarkable initiatives. The olive farms, which is making a new kind of steak, reinventing, it's called, it's not Beyond Meat, it's reinventing meat. They're using a 3D printer, and I was at a barbecue of the CEO's house for the Yom Ha'atzmaut for Independence Day, and it was pretty good. I mean, I don't know if it's as good as Impossible, but it's getting there. But the point is that I think Israel has a lot to say in this area. We've got a whole company called Chicken. So the protein alternatives are going to be very important. And that's an area where Israel could work. And then finally, like I mentioned, this notion of sequestering carbon, even when we do everything perfectly, we're not going to get to zero, not for the cement industry, not for steel. We'll get better, I hope, a lot better than we are now. But that's 7% each, or 6% of the global emissions. So we're going to need to be taking carbon out. And that are several very interesting ideas, but I do hope that Israel does begin to take its place at the table in terms of these new technologies, which are so important for our common future.
Well, thank you. And I think I would just add that there are a lot of things going on in Israel in the technology and climate space, and there is some value in just collating them all and celebrating them so that we can encourage others of the business opportunities. Let me pivot and ask a different question that I know it's an issue that's near and dear to Amit's heart, that relates to environmental justice and in particular climate justice. And it also stems a little bit alone from your comment about following the lead of the United States and the Biden administration. As I think most people know, the Biden administration has really emphasized environmental justice and climate justice. And with respect to climate justice, has a number of fairly interesting and innovative policies. One of them is called Justice 40, where the Biden administration has committed, as we all know, the transformation to a low carbon economy and dealing with climate change is going to require huge investment, huge expenditures of funds, and everything from technology development, but also resiliency and adaptation and responding to the disasters alone that you mentioned. And so there will be a lot of money in this kind of climate economy. And the Biden administration has set up a program to commit that 40% of those funds will go to environmental justice or climate justice related concerns, either businesses that are owned by disadvantaged communities or communities themselves. So my question is, what is Israel's posture? What should it be with respect to climate justice, and how do you see that playing out?
Amit, I think his first job at Adam Tev was working on an environmental justice portfolio for the. He may have something to say. I always do listening here, but maybe you'll say something, and then I'll chime in and compliment if you want to.
Yeah. Oh well, thanks. I think that as we say about environmental justice, the poor people and underprivileged people will suffer more, are suffering more from environmental hazards, and will suffer more from climate change. Of course, they lack the money, the means, the power to influence decision makers. They lack most of the time. They lack the information. Environmental information about what's happening near their houses. So this is a huge problem, and that's why the government must invest more in budgeting weaker communities in Israel. Now, I think that two things that we just lately have done together with the Knesset and the government refer to it, but we have to see that the money goes back to poor communities. For example, for one, I can mention the single-use products, taxing, the taxation on single-use products, single-use plastic materials. We just recently passed it in the government, and this is a huge thing. But of course, it will not be as effective as we want it to be if the money won't go back to poorer communities, because it's all about also the cost of living, and people telling us that it's a problem for them. The same thing I can say about carbon tax. We are talking today in Israel about carbon tax and how important it is, like it is being done in other countries. Actually, you know that Israel and Turkey are the only two states from the OECD states that don't have yet carbon tax. So we are pushing for it nowadays. But again, we want the money to go back to be invested in clean energy, mostly for poor communities, poor neighborhoods, and so on. I think that the advantage that we have in Israel is the fact that being a small country, you know, everyone is being influenced from environmental hazards. What we must make sure is that the poor people will have the means to fight it. And, you know, those two examples I gave, I think will you know, try to minimize the gap between poor and rich people.
I would say this to add to what Amit said. One of the neat parliamentary tools that I didn't even know existed is the ability of a member of Knesset on Sunday morning to send a request to the Knesset Secretariat with a request for a pressing hearing on a topic of his or her choice. And if you're smart enough to get 3 or 4 other members of other parties to join you, it almost always get through, and you can force there to be a hearing on a topic. So this coming Sunday, we are putting in a request which would require a hearing on the various and sundry obstacles to promotion of renewable energy in Israel. And the number one that we're starting with is what we call the Form 4 problem. Form 4 is a bureaucratic permission that you need to get before you move into your house. It shows that the house was legally planned and that your construction met the specifications, et cetera. Now, what is the problem? Large communities in Israel, particularly in the Arab sector, have been built prior to the fact that there were any plans, without any ability to expand, and entire communities don't have Form 4. And when the government requires this form as a prerequisite to getting a connection to the electrical grid, which you need to have a solar system on your roof if you want to be able to get electricity at night or whatever. So the point is that entire sections of Israel, 21% of Israelis, many of the Muslim Arabs, are just not able to participate in that. And I'm really glad that in November, you're going to get to hear from Yossi Abramovich, who is one of the biggest movers and shakers on this issue, particularly with the Bedouin communities that are having their disagreements over land. And I think what Yossi said, and I'll let him say it to you in November, was maybe rather than argue about land, we should turn these into solar facilities. But I'm saying even on the roofs, Israeli Arab communities happen to have very flat roofs, usually have large houses. They need to be part of the program. So that's the kind of area where there's a kind of a link in with the environmental justice thing, because it's not like that Arab communities didn't want to have permits. I don't think this was any act of civil disobedience. It was just a question of being left behind. So that's an area for sure where I think that we might see sort of an element of social justice. I have other things to say, but we can go on to the next question.
Yeah, so there's a question from one of our participants, Anthony Pam, who asked, interesting question that, you know, there's proposal to transport water from the Mediterranean Sea to the Dead Sea, or from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, and whether or not the wave energy and the gravity drop from those proposals could provide enough clean energy to power desalination plants.
That's a easy answer. The World Bank assessment of the so-called Red Dead Canal included the hydroelectric power from that height differential. Of course, the Red Sea is at sea level. The Dead Sea, what, 215, whatever it is, meters below sea level. And that, now when Herzl first thought of this notion of creating a canal, he didn't really realize how much energy it takes to pump water up to Jerusalem and bring it down. Although some people say that there are ways to go around now and do that. But for sure, the issue of whether or not Israel should be bringing water from either the Mediterranean Sea or the Red Sea to the Red Sea to the Dead Sea is one which is hotly debated in environmental circles. I think a lot of the conventional or traditional suspicion by environmentalists about big technological projects informs a lot of environmentalist views. They say, look at the Aswan Dam, look at this. If we make this thing, we could ruin the Dead Sea. I tend to be a little bit more of a risk taker in this area just because I see what's happening with the Dead Sea. I see it disappearing, and it can't happen on our watch. And there's two different ways that we might work this down. One is bringing the water from the Red Sea, desalinizing it, sending the water over, like I said, to Jordan, which has such shortages, and the brine, the 30% that's left, putting that in as I see. That's sort of the one. The trouble is it's about a $3 or $4 billion price tag. If we're lucky, probably be twice that. And nobody seems to be willing to pay for it. We all love the Dead Sea, but we're not willing to pay for it. Then the other notion is maybe we could run the water in its traditional route via the Jordan River, but it's not clear to me that Jordan would allow that much water to go in the Dead Sea when they're so short. But clearly, I think we don't want to be the generation that creates another Aral Sea in the Middle East. And but yes, there is a lot of thought about that high differential and using it for renewable energy purposes.
Great. Here's another question from our audience today, Alon and Amit. Can you speak a little bit to the role of municipalities in solving the climate crisis, addressing climate change in Israel? And we've experienced this in the United States, especially during the prior administration, Alon, as you referred to, where cities and states sort of took in some cases a leadership role if they felt the federal government wasn't doing enough, and that happens today as well. So we're curious about how that's playing out in Israel.
Over to you, Amit.
Okay, thanks. Well, Brian, after learning so much from you about how the states took, the lead in the Trump administration, and worked bottom up in order, to help themselves, reach really green environment in the States and so on. We really took this model here in Israel, and we work a lot with municipalities bottom up in reaching environmental solutions, not waiting for the government to do it, not waiting for the budget to come from the government, but really taking the lead. Now, there are a lot of programs now taking place. I can talk about, two things that are really fantastic. One is working with municipalities about, if we say, net zero, we also say that it has to start from the different subjects themselves. So we're talking today with municipalities about water zero or zero water, water resilience, using and recycling the water they use again and again. So this is a huge thing that is taking place also in regard to runoff water, taking the municipalities, helping themselves, not waiting for the government. On another issue, and Alon mentioned it in his presentation, we are not waiting for the government to plant trees. We are working today with municipalities in order to bring to a situation where there's a tree per person. So, for example, in the city of Herzliya, this is their climate change plan, local plan, in order to bring for, by 2030, every resident will have, one tree. And it's really fantastic because we know this is the natural solution, one of the natural solutions for the climate crisis. So it's really, really taking place now in Israel. We just lately managed to work with municipalities about prohibition of single-use plastic in the coastlines. So, cities like Eilat and Herzliya and others, and Tel Aviv will not allow anymore for plastic to be used in the beaches in the coastline. So this is really great. We're not waiting for the government to do it. We are working in a synergy, you know, on one hand, promoting laws to be implemented top down, but on the other hand, working a lot bottom up with municipalities.
I don't have a lot to add to that. I think we all saw during the COVID crisis in Israel that sometimes it's not so wise to be such a centralized governmental system in Israel. And I think that's certainly true. We're now realizing that in energy. I'm very pleased that the Minister of Defense, who's the head of my party, talks about the security concerns he has about having an energy system that is so based on 4 or 5 major facilities and the need to then. I think that as we move to more decentralized energy system, we need to give municipalities the latitude they need to move forward. Israel had at the early stages something they called the Forum of 15, which were basically the rich cities in Israel, but they did take this issue of climate change much more seriously than the central government did at the time. So they're the ones who can adopt the green building and enforce it, green building requirements. So I think there's a lot that cities can do, and I'm hoping that in the upcoming municipal elections, which is only in about maybe 16 months, maybe climate might be an important issue, which would make a difference between somebody being elected mayor and maybe not so.
Great, thank you very much. Let me ask you a different question. About 50, I think it was 50 years ago, Milton Friedman, who was a Nobel Prize winning economist, wrote an essay. And in that essay, he said the only corporate social responsibility for a company is to maximize profits. And he explained that philosophy. And I think at the time, 50 years ago, it probably wasn't that controversial. Now we live in a different world. And of course, ESG and other imperatives are quite salient. And I think the difference between shareholder value and stakeholder value is something that a lot of us are thinking about. What do you think, Alon, about, and Amit, about the role of companies in addressing climate and climate change issues?
Well, they said the good definition of a cynic is somebody who knows the price of everything, the value of nothing. I think that if we only want to, evaluate a corporate success by the bottom line, we'll be in a pretty bad place. I think I'm finishing a fantastic book as a professor. I guess I have to make recommended reading recommendations. But my favorite climate book of 2021 was Bill Gates' Climate: How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. But this book, Speed and Scale, which is really here, I actually have it right in front of my desk. So I'm finishing up this past weekend, is a tremendous blueprint for where we need to go. And it has testimonials here from just about all the heads of the top corporations, Bezos and everything. And even the Walmart's has a vision for climate change. Thank heavens. And I think a lot of the supply chains, which these kind of corporations can push, are going to be part of the solution. So yeah, I think that it's very, very important that we get the business sector on board and don't demonize it. I might just say, just sort of a little current event, we're all working during these next 2-3 weeks. Israel's #1 factory in terms of release of greenhouse gas emissions is the Nesher Ramla cement plant, about 7% of Israel's total emissions. And they're getting very happily prepared to receive a 7-year permit of operation, which I'm very concerned would freeze technology towards old technology and not allow some of the new innovative things coming down the pike for cut back on them. And I'm hopeful that that company, which at least claims to be not a profit maximizing animal and monster, but actually one that cares about the public interest as well, will be willing to show some flexibility so that if we do have some technological breakthroughs, Israel and of course the cities of Ramla and Lod, which are exposed to their emissions, will be the beneficiaries. But stay tuned on that.
I will just add to this that, I think that the Israeli businesses and, industries know today that they have no other choice but, to try and, cope with the situation because they have a lot of pressure from international businesses and the industries. For example, if we take industries like Bosch, Ford, Panasonic, and others who declared net zero in 2050, they also demand from Israeli companies, if they want, to have trade relations, to reach or for first, to declare that they will also reach net zero and to start taking steps towards it. For example, we talk about today about the product, the life, the life of the product. For first, do we need this product? How is it a green product? What about shipping it between countries? And what is the carbon footprint that it causes? What about implementing it in another country? So this is, those are, all criteria that other companies are demanding today from Israeli companies also, to reach in order for this commerce to continue between them.
Thank you. So we have a lot of other questions. We have time for one more. It's a question that gets back to one of your main points, Alon, the importance of trees. One of our participants asked whether there's apparently some social media post about the upcoming agricultural reform law allowing for the cutting down of trees without permits. And essentially, if you could speak to that.
I'll do a dress rehearsal because it's coming up. We have the state comptroller came out with a very damning report about Israel's lack of appropriate response to invasive species. And one of the arguments we have here is I'll sort of tell a humorous anecdote. I think it's humorous, I hope. For many years, I had the honor, you could say dubious honor if you want, of being on the international board as a volunteer of the Jewish National Fund. And for 8 years, I chaired the committee that oversees soft forestry. And we wanted to have a tree contest. We had a very successful national contest for the national bird, and every Israeli family argued over the dinner table. Should it be this bird or that? And in the end, the Hopi bird won, and it was a big surprise anyway. And we said, we should do the same thing for trees. What's the national tree? And I said, well, let's bring a list down. And we sat in front of the committee, and I said, but where's the eucalyptus tree? And all the ecologists said, Alon, surely you know the eucalyptus tree is an exotic species, invasive. It comes from Australia. And I said, wait a second. The eucalyptus tree arrived in Israel sometime during the 19th century. We think about 1880. The sabra, the prickly pear cactus, has only been in Israel since the 17th century. And that is the, axiomatic, ultimate, symbol of Israelism is this. So how can we not give at some point there? I mean, I said, it's always that way with us immigrants. You're never willing to accept that we're already part of the society. And they said, don't give us all your neuroses as an Alech Hadash. We don't want to have this in there. So there's a big debate whether or not the eucalyptus trees that were the subject of Naomi Shemer songs and poems should be accepted. And that's what's sort of going on here, that some of these trees by some of the darker green, and then we have a nice, rich diversity of opinions in environmental movement as to what is a legitimate tree in Israel. I tend to be a little bit more lax, as you can hear on this, I think, but there are certain trees like I won't get into an Australian thing that actually is invasive, is taking over lands. We have to cut back on that. But I think that when we think about the problem of we shouldn't be such purists that don't realize that over half the trees planted in Israeli cities are not indigenous Israeli trees. The jacaranda trees are blooming now. They're beautiful. They're not local trees, but they're really giving a lot of shade and giving a lot. So we need to do maybe a healthy balance, certainly in open spaces and in our national parks. We want to preserve our ecological integrity, but I don't think we need to be cutting down invasive species. But I'm out there on that issue. I don't know if Adam Tevadin has taken a stand on that particular one. Let's see.
Well, I think because we're out of time, we're gonna.
Oh, Saved by the Bell.
you're gonna, yeah, exactly. You're gonna have the final word, I believe, unless you have 1 second on. Or we give it the final word to Alon, you think?
Yeah, Alon said it all. Yes.
Okay, so I'll just say this to wrap things up, if I might, Brian. Look, Israel has serious environmental challenges, and these challenges are far too serious for you all to sit back and see it as some sort of a spectator sport. We need players. And by being engaged with Friends of Israel's Environment and supporting environmental organizations like the Israel Union for Environmental Defense, you can make a real difference. I can't imagine a better investment, certainly in Israel's future, but I think also the planet as we tackle these unbelievably daunting but critical challenges together, to finding the kind of, how should I put it, effective, professional, values-driven, and accessible organizations. So I strongly urge you to stay engaged. help when you can, and let's be part of the solution to save this troubled planet.
Thank you, Alon. This was very inspiring. It's clear why over 150 people signed up to listen to on a Sunday. And I think we all found your talk very inspiring, the conversation really, really insightful. So thank you, Amit, for co-hosting. And thank you all of our attendees, and we'll be in touch with you about future programs coming up in the coming months. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot.
Detroit.
Bye-bye.